Hey everybody, my name is Shelley Reed. I'm here with Heidi Benke, and this is the Project Manager Office Hours. It is a time for project managers, people who are working on projects, whether they have an official project management degree or a certificate or anything. It's a place for you to come get support with other people who are doing project management at legal aid, legal service organizations primarily. So this month we are having a very informal meeting. It's going to be a discussion time. And our topic that we're bringing today is advocating for yourself and your project. And we want to bring in discussions on raises, project priorities, things like that. But since it is an open forum session, we also have the opportunity to talk about things that are bugging you, things that you need assistance with, or things that are top priorities in your projects right now. The other thing we want to talk about today is we put out a call for anybody that was interested in having a project manager um, support group for studying for the Project Manager Institute's certificate program that's coming up. To take advantage of the current test versus the new test that's coming out in July, so we can give some updates on that as well. So welcome. And Heidi, do you have anything you want to say before we kick off our
No, I will
discussion?
I will just add that I have a project management professional certification with the Project Management Institute, so PMI's PMP certification, because acronyms. And I find that having gone through training and figuring out a lot of things preparing for that, having had the experience draw into the study group, I think helped a lot. Um, it was really easy to get a sense of what the academic side meant when I could draw in and say the personal experience was relevant. So having conversations and having a study group, I would just say if you need to join or if you are interested in joining, please do. Um, I will also start by saying my position is statewide project manager with Georgia Legal Services Program. And it is a position, no position is created out of thin air, but it is a position that I had to advocate for and was not existent in Georgia legal before I started advocating for it. So I may end up um, having more war stories or whatnot about times I've had to hit a brick wall or advocate for myself than others. But I also want to hear what other people are struggling with or successes they've had, especially in terms of asserting themselves to get their projects off the ground. Not everybody's going to have the same experience of creating their own position. But yeah,
Perfect.
uh, with that, who do we want to start with? Do we have, is advocating for your own project something people see? Like, do people have trouble with that? Does anyone have a story of the challenge, not necessarily the solution?
Well, I'll start because I don't have that problem and I'm interested in hearing from other people. My name is Jay Collier and I work as a contract project manager. So usually the scope of projects is determined before I begin. But I will say that I would be interested in hearing from people about when they feel a project manager is needed. So, with medium and smaller organizations, oftentimes there's outreach to a vendor for a project, and that vendor would really benefit from having somebody in the organization, advocating for the organization and being a liaison. And that's the role that I'm playing right now for 603 Legal Aid in New Hampshire. And so I, I'm interested in hearing about other people's experience of identifying when more deliberate project management is needed rather than just kind of off the cuff day-to-day management skills. And there are five others here who may be able to answer some of those questions.
Well, and I know, Chris, I'm just going to pick on you. I know you're with North Carolina, so you've got a larger organization, but I don't know about everybody else. Um, but if there's a smaller organization here, do you find that you have anyone consistently acting as a project manager? Then yeah. Oh,
I mean, I'll say that when we were smaller, because I've been with Lance long enough that we used to be a lot smaller than we are now, um, what we had was the gang of six. There were six people across the organization that, through their powers combined, had a complete picture of how the organization worked. And so anytime something important had to get done, the six of us were sort of informally summoned into a room to figure out how we were going to solve the problem and balance the resources and run the project. So there wasn't a project manager. There was a anarcho-syndicalist collective of project managers who sort of mashed it all together and got everybody moving in the same direction. Which over time, as we grew larger, sort of turned into like I am fancifully called the head of our project management office. Um, and like to an extent, when Megan gets back from lunch, you may want to hear from her. She's also with Legal Aid, but she is the project manager for our innovation lab, which we keep off in a little pocket universe where they can experiment, and if it blows up, it won't blow up everything else. So, like, she has the unenviable position of trying to not just like run project management for what amounts to a small subsidiary organization, but making those projects connect into the larger infrastructure.
and Dalma, were you gonna add something?
Yeah, so Dalma Suarez here. It's my first time here, so I'm very thankful for this group. Legal Aid of Marin in Northern California, about 30 miles north of San Francisco. We're a really small team. There's 17 of us, and I'm director of programs, but I find that I am often in the nitty-gritty of every day and can't take on it really can't take on my position as director of programs and do that job because I spending a lot of time doing the day-to-day. So really interested in learning about, one, how to advocate for a program manager, two, how to find funding for that, and three, how to structure that position into our current workflow in ABC. Yeah, it's becoming, I think it's becoming more noticeable that we need somebody to take on the day-to-day of projects. It's sort of like what Christopher was saying. There's a group of us in management that know the ins and outs of the organization, so we can really come in and do it all. But we all know that leads to burnout. And I'm certainly feeling it 5 years into the legal aid universe. So finding ways to troubleshoot that as we go. But yeah.
Correct. So I've noted that talking about advocating for resources, I don't want to get too far away from Jay's question right now. Let's go. So we will get to your point, Dalma. So Jay, I don't know. I guess when the line becomes managing a project is too much for you with your normal work and all of the other things on your desk, on your plate, that, that's when you have to start thinking about more staff or someone else to do it. But the tools of project management can be used by anyone, even in just their daily work. So I want to clarify that project management skills don't require a project, so to speak. So I just want to make sure that we're not confusing two things, that I don't think that every project needs a consultant. But there definitely comes a time when an organization just doesn't have the resources to um, put their staff, add another plate of things that people are juggling. Um, so that is, when your staff just there's just no more there, nothing else to ask of staff. But I do think that the tools of project management can be utilized by everyone, and which can also increase efficiency, right? So that we are able to handle more than what maybe we were handling before. That doesn't mean we should. So that's the other part of advocacy, when they're trying to hand off something else because you do handle everything so well. um so advocacy is also learning how to say no. When you're already overworked, overstressed, over everything, but everybody else sees things as being very put together. So that is another aspect of it. um does
Megan and I
anybody
are
have
nodding
any
along
thoughts,
in
any?
in shared experience on this one.
Yeah, if I can add one thing to my earlier point. So the distinction between program management and project management, my experience with smaller organizations is the project managers who have responsibility for saying yes and no about projects over time are actually also fulfilling the project manager role or are managing projects. And so my experience has been I've stepped in a way when an organization is ready to add staff to demonstrate what the role of a project manager or a person that's dedicated to the project, what that's like. And in a number of cases, that is an advocacy for more staff to focus on project management. And that's often been the outcome, because there is a conflict of interest between program managers saying yes or no and project managers needing to get something to happen correctly. And that, I think, is one of the hardest things for a staff program manager to do.
I will add here, since there are so many people interested in the PMP exam specifically, that the difference between a project and a program formally is largely related to the fact that projects are supposed to be temporary and programs are supposed to be larger scale, comprised of multiple projects, something that keeps going. Um, I think a lot of times in our organizations, people talk about project management when they mean program management. Um, and regardless, I mean, this is one of those things where you just have to understand how other people think about it. You're not going to correct them on it because that'll just end up being losing battle.
And you can take Ellison Tap as a perfect example of bad naming. We are still, after 25 years, the technology assistance project.
Everyone's got versions of that. How many eviction prevention projects do we have out there? I mean, that's throughout the legal aid sphere, probably most organizations. But if people are going to study for the PMP exam, they should know that fact.
The one that I see that comes up a lot in that vein is then there's the next layer up. And as you have an organization reach a point where they realize that they need project management in place as a separate discipline, often that means they've actually reached the point where what they need is project managers, program managers, and portfolio management. Because I think that, like, at the point at which what you're really, like, the thing that's getting away from you is the portfolio management.
Yes.
That's where I have seen, like, that's where institutions start to, on their own, realize that they have a problem. But they typically start trying to solve, and by the time you get here, this isn't like, I'm not knocking this as a way to solve the problem. They typically try to, often they'll start at the top and work their way down rather than trying to put in like really good, like ground level project management discipline. They'll start by trying to manage the portfolio, in part because it becomes so difficult to get good project or program discipline when you can't wrap your hands around the like 9 million things that are in flight at the moment. It's actually what I spend most of my day doing, is trying to wrap my hands around the like, I have a list. My list is currently over 100. That does not include all the stuff that Megan is doing, of just the IT related bits of the portfolio.
Well, and Lank went for PMO before you even had formal project managers. Like you went full PMO, which I'm sorry, project
Yes.
management office, the
Yeah,
department
we
of project
installed a
managers.
full project management office for the IT department before we hired any project managers, just to like start at the top and work our way down.
Can you say
And
how
one
big
more
your-
academic nuance thing, portfolio in project management terms is unrelated, possibly programs and projects that are all not completely unrelated, but they're all under the same umbrella. So, I mean, it's project program could be multiple projects that are all related to something ongoing. Portfolio is when you start expanding even further and it gets a little messier, which is why Chris is saying people try and start from the top down, but really bottom up is how you get the skill set, I think.
Can you each say how big your organizations are? Because I think that's a really pertinent factor.
Sure. Georgia Legal Services Program is a organization that covers 154 of Georgia's 159 counties, so everything except Atlanta, and we have about 200 employees. And we have 9 formal offices that provide legal assistance, several different substantive groups that also work, but they're not formal offices. So that's what we're looking at.
Legal Aid of North Carolina covers all 100 counties of North Carolina from Murphy to Manteo. We are currently sitting at about 25 offices, about 380 staff, plus a variety of interns, and I think we're sitting at about 12 special projects where they do specific areas of law but are not bound to a geographical area.
Dalva mentioned 17 or something like that. Megan, how big is the Innovation Lab? Sorry, caught you in the middle of a
No, you're good. This is my first one of these, so I kind of thought it might be a presentation, and I couldn't eat my lunch during this time, and now I am realizing I'm sorely wrong. So, and I hadn't eaten breakfast either, so I was like, I really got to eat.
Oh.
Sorry, y'all. I would share.
It's a safe
virtually
space.
if that was possible.
Yeah, it is a safe space.
I was like, it's Shelly. It'll be fine. Yeah, so in addition to everything Chris said, in the Innovation Lab, we have there's 3 of us now that are like full-time Innovation Lab folks. So that's myself. We have call him a legal technologist, but he's a senior software developer. Just started in October, so that's kind of added a whole other suite of internal things that we didn't have before, both on our end and on the IT end. And then our chief innovation officer, who right now acts as like that, and our program director for the lab itself. And then we have someone that's a part of the comms team for the whole organization, but is kind of dedicated to doing comms stuff for us. But so I'm in an interesting position where I am technically a program manager per my title, but I am actually a project manager when it comes to what I do day to day. But I feel like to the point that you said in the confliction that we're talking about of kind of program and project. Yeah, and I think that's a really good question of like, when do we actually need a specific project manager for each thing? The lab itself is sort of in theory supposed to be more geared towards projects, right? We're kind of like an incubator within our organization to develop, test, experiment, like Chris said, but then the things actually live longer term elsewhere. So like if we're developing like an intake mechanism, we're really involved in like the development of it, the testing of it, the launching of it, but then eventually it's going to live over with like operations and as part of that larger structure, right? So I think, and that's some of I think what we're kind of a little bit of a challenge now, because so we also try to figure out, okay, what's the end of this project, or what's the end of this version and that we shift, right? And maybe there's another version coming, or there's ongoing feedback and iteration as you develop a new tool. But yeah, I would say, and we kind of act as a bit of a consultant, like to the other offices and projects within legal aid as well. So some of that I think stays more in the program manager bucket of just kind of like brainstorming, thinking what's out there, um, like talking through use cases. But then if it kind of shifts to either we need to get some sort of tool or we need to build some sort of tool, or kind of do more extensive work, then it comes more project-y, I would say. And then yeah, I feel like it boils down to like who's driving that boat, right? And if it needs to be kind of like the full suite of project management, or is it more maybe not all of it. But I do like the distinction you made, Shelley, too, of like thinking of the skills too outside of maybe that specific role, because I think that that is something that like across nonprofits could be really helpful. A lot of us, especially in legal services, we are attorneys by trade and don't necessarily learn all these other things, but then get shoved into or elect to be in like management roles or director roles. And we really need those skills because it is you're moving projects forward. So yeah, I like that, and thinking of how do we have both project managers, but then also project management skills organization wide.
And I just want to insert in here, sorry, Megan, that this is yours and Dalma's first meetings. We do alternate formal presentations, open forum type sessions. And it just depends on when we can schedule different things or what the topic is going to be, whether there is a formal presentation versus just a complete open forum. And this is one of our more open forum sessions. And that is true of all of our community groups. So if you come to data or project management or any of the other community type groups.
Danielle, did you have something to add?
I was just gonna say, I guess, who I'm with and our size. So I am Danielle. I'm the administrative director at Alaska Legal Services, and so I'm still on coffee mode right now on my time zone. But we have a really lean, I guess, core operational infrastructure team, and we don't necessarily have specific program or project managers. We do have a big community justice worker resource center where we've had our community justice worker project go to a program. We successfully rebranded that. But I think we have some specific folks there, but we've been having a lot of internal debate as we've gone through different grant applications about whether or not we need a project manager, a program manager, or if we just need more infrastructure building and operational support. So this conversation is really interesting to me. So thank you.
Awesome. And then Ray, do you want to tell us about your organization just so we know the full scale?
So the Harris County Office of Managed Assigned Counsel, we have 21 staff, but we handle about 230 misdemeanor attorneys that are vendors of the state. And just Harris County, just misdemeanor. So my role in the organization is because we're such a small group, we don't really need enterprise hardware and enterprise everything. So I am the IT manager, if you will, of the office, but then that becomes a list of projects depending on what's going on, right? Today it's, do we need a Ring doorbell on the front door to replace the current doorbell, right? But I would then interface with the county IT and confirm with them what technologies might be available for us. Hopefully something inexpensive, but likely not, because it has to be enterprise grade and the whole 9 yards and secure. So yeah, it's just I market myself as the I proj I market myself as the guy who does everything, including the kitchen sink. So just wherever I can help.
I usually introduce myself as the plumber for Georgia Legal. I get to go under in the underbelly and see where all the things are held together with duct tape and bubble gum and hopefully fix it a little bit better. So
Right.
I love that we're on the same page with that.
Yeah.
My comment on PMP is being in IT for the past probably closer to 15 years. I just don't test well. And while I kind of want, the little 3 letters next to my name, I just don't know if I'll test well. And instead of that, I started I actually have a certificate of public administration, which is like a third of a master's in public administration. So that one apparently I can do. But then I realized that both my wife being in school and myself being in school was not a good thing. So I'm just letting her finish her thing first. And we'll see when my time is up.
Oh, and on that note, there are other programs, right? If you know that testing is not your thing, look at one of the other organizations, and Inten has a great certificate program. You don't get the little initials behind your name, but you can list it in your LinkedIn profile that you have these certificates from Inten. And they are absolutely doable, and they have made them about 2 years ago. They changed the cost. It is very approachable, and it is not a heavy lift to get one of their certificates.
Can you put that on the chat whenever you have
Sure.
it? Thanks.
I will. Just a moment. I wanted to bring up, get back to Jay's point on, or question, when the delay of not having a separate entity or person dedicated to that project outweighs the cost of having one. That can be the point, where you start thinking, okay, well, if we delay this project longer, what is the cost to our organization? And so that can help think about reaching out for either staff or for a separate entity. And then Heidi, you had something to say, and then I'd like to move to the advocating for resources piece.
Yeah, I was just going to point out to Ray's comment, you can become a member of the Project Management Institute, PMI, without having the certifications. They also have a certified associate of project management, which is a smaller test. But if you just join PMI, that annual membership gives you access to a lot of training on project management topics and things like that. So there are ways to participate in that same sphere without having to go through the testing process. The PMP is notoriously a difficult test, and every time they give you a new version of the exam, it keeps going higher. That doesn't mean don't try it. It just means if you want to do baby steps, you absolutely can.
To get to Ray's point, Ray, you were talking about some simpler projects like determining a doorbell, and that reminds me that there are a couple of factors that are relevant for determining what resources are needed. First, what are the scope and size of projects? Something as complex as the knowledge around a PMP or having a PMO, which is pretty awesome, is great for these multi-year large enterprise projects. But for smaller ones, the knowledge that both Heidi and Shelley are talking about that you can get in a lot of different ways is sufficient. But what I found in different organizations is the culture of the organization is really important. There are oftentimes senior managers, VPs, who want something to happen and don't want to think about what needs to happen in the weeds. And there are people who only think about the weeds and totally miss the big picture about what needs to happen. And so the culture, I think, is a big part of, Shelley, your original question of how to advocate for the right next step. What's the lever to move forward, depending on the culture of the department and the people? Hands are up.
I was furiously nodding along because 500%.
Yeah.
And I think especially when the high up um maybe doesn't understand all the things that go into the make the thing happen, right? And then you have a bunch of conflicting priorities and who's working on what, and yeah, I feel that
So
at times.
how do we educate them, right? So what are the ways that we can educate is document what you're doing, right? And make sure people understand that these are the steps that are required to get there. So that documentation is great for your project. If you're working on a TIG grant, for example, having all of those steps, we wrote out a RFP and we consulted with LSNTAP to get samples from the database. Document those things, because at the end of the grant, you're not going to remember that. But it also helps educate and provide these like updates to your directors, to your managers, because then they understand all of these things. And that goes into getting more staff, right? Because all of those things add up. Because if they have no idea what it takes to get a project going, having that documentation is good for yourself, because then you have a step-by-step guide for your next project. If you documented what you're doing on this project, now you can go back and look, oh, when I do this, I need to make sure I do these things. But then you're also educating management. Okay, we're asking, this person to take on all of these things. And then when you come back and say, I just can't do anymore, we need more help, they have those they have a bigger vision. And then same thing for funders, right? When the question was, how do you get funding for a project manager or project management? And that is showing all of the resources that it takes to get a project to fruition. But it also takes and shows, if you show all the things that needs to be done, then it makes it more tangible for a funder to see, why do we want to pay for a project manager? Why are they putting a staff person in to manage this project when they're asking for a grant? Because you have that documentation. So documenting your steps, your work, but then the next piece is documenting your accomplishments, right? Back in the day, a resume was when you put a job, you would say, all the things that you did on a daily basis, right? They used to be bullet points on a resume. Maybe not in the legal world, but in the rest of the world, you would have those things. So that's another way of documenting your accomplishments. Tying in what the project is versus where it's going. Connecting those dots for the people that might not understand that we need this to get here. So that would be where I would start documenting, but just documenting because it makes writing reports so much easier later. So think of it that way. If you don't want to toot your own horn, for example, at least help yourself out, by having those steps that you had to take. Any other thoughts on how can you advocate for funding?
I would second what you're saying about writing it all out. One of the ways you can identify if you need a person dedicated to something is if you actually consider the scope and you consider the deadline and you consider what money you have available for it. If you are writing out like you would for a grant, what the project purpose is, what you expect it to happen, and all. It doesn't have to be a super formal document. Ideally, it would end up being one eventually when you get more practiced. But if you start thinking of the project from start to finish instead of just thinking of, hey, I want you to go fix intake. That's scaring me right there. But if you actually start thinking about the steps involved and you get the right people in the room and you get a sense of the personalities that you're working between, the technologies that you need, the cross-department pieces of it, the stakeholders, you will naturally see this is a larger project or this is a smaller project. And I think that can help your organization get your head around it. And as Shelley said, putting it in a grants are the easiest way I have found to think about projects, because when you're writing a grant, you have to justify a lot of this. So anyone with grant writing practice is more used to thinking about things that way. And I think like another way to think about it, someone once told me that with technology initiative grants, TIGs, somebody said they don't ever apply for one unless the project costs $100,000 or more, because otherwise the paperwork outweighs the project itself. And I think when it comes to project management specifically, having a project manager involved, there's got to be a threshold of somebody is in charge of documenting and making sure everything's happening on time and whatnot. If the person doing that is outweighing the benefit to actually getting the project, you're not supposed to have a project manager. If that person's active work on that administrative communication side is not as strong as the benefit, then if that makes sense, then you're probably looking at needing either somebody within your organization or an external consultant. Jay, would you agree with that?
I would, and I think there's a couple things that you all just pointed out that are really interesting. It took me a long time to realize that the most important skill in project management is communication, and that communication is sender and receiver with interference in between, and that documentation and reporting depends on the person to whom the documentation and the reporting are going to. I've had the experience of overwhelming people with too much information because they didn't want to know, and other people not enough. And so I found in the TIG grant I'm working on, it's a totally different set of feedback, reporting, documentation that's needed from any other kind of project I've worked on, which is kind of interesting. The other one is when somebody's feeling swamped. I found that for the senior managers that don't really want to know about the details, and I like going to them with yes options, we list all the things that the person's doing with how much time it takes, and it ends up being 1.7 FTE. It's a question of prioritizing. All right, what do you think is most important? 1, 2, 3, nominal group technique, just going right down through the list. And it turns out in some instances, the person who's in charge doesn't really care that something's happening. And so they're not going to be receptive to wanting another staff person because you made the case that there's 1.7 person FTE needed for all of this, but they don't only want this. So the communication and the prioritization are the things that, as a person who has had a lot of specific project management training, but never any kind of a formal certification, those are the things I found were most helpful over the years.
Exposing cost has been consistently the easiest way to communicate. Like you can tout benefits, but because the place I think that the formal PMP structure meshes badly with nonprofits is that it's sort of written around the assumption that this is going to be a for-profit corporation, and we just run the engine backwards. Like the client is not the source of revenue. This fundamentally alters some presuppositions about PMP style project management. And so rather than focusing on benefits, to sort of riff off of what you had mentioned, Jay, is expose costs. Because all organizations have project managers. They may not have a person with that title, but that thing is happening. Do you want to incur the cost of having 7 people do that with no plan? or do you want to make the investment to free up those people to focus on the things they're actually experts in, and have somebody take that on as their first job so that they can apply expertise? I get more mileage out of a, like, we're going to pay the piper one way or the other. How expensive do you want this to be?
Mm-hmm. I'll add in there that when I was starting out, I was flat out told that we should not be hiring any admin roles because that money could be used to hire an attorney. And the counter to that was, if you have somebody who can support and balance that work or streamline it, then the attorneys can be more efficient with helping clients. So you would free up more resources rather than having one body who, I mean, we all know what turnover is like. And especially now, a lot of our organizations are seeing a lot of retirements, I think. Legal aid has a strange, good strange, but we have a lot of people who've been in our organizations for 30, 40 years. And as they retire, they're taking all their knowledge with them. And with Georgia Legal specifically, we have a whole lot of people who were here when we started, and they were here building the ship as they were sailing it, but that doesn't mean they were documenting what they were doing as they were sailing it. So now we're trying to catch up and make sure we have sustainability and succession planning.
I think that's a good crisis to use to, like, make the argument, because the thing that we're discovering, because we're in kind of the same boat, is the graying of the field produces this effect where if you have been doing something since it was a twinkle in somebody's eye, you can do it a lot faster than somebody who has had to learn it from the beginning. Like, this is a little bit how I wound up in the role that I have within the organization. Is I was here when a lot of the deep magic of the IT department was written. And so, I know where the stone table is, and I know to avoid the lion and all of that. But it means that, like, I am one of the heartbeats that we have a problem if mine stops. And so we needed to transition me into a place where I was ringmastering instead of balancing a ball on my nose, or that would be lost. But, like, that's going to happen. Like, every time we lose somebody who's been here for 40 years, it takes multiple people to replace what they were doing. And so a focus on expertise and execution rather than just bodies. It's a little bit like putting together closing, you make your case during the trial and you don't say any of your conclusions until closing argument. And there's a little bit of the same thing with advocating how this stuff gets done, is you just sort of surface the litany of problems we're about to have when somebody retires and let management draw its own conclusions about, well, we always have time for the most important thing. How many of those slots do you want? To answer Jay's questions, I didn't. We got lucky. When we brought in a chief technology officer who had previously worked for Michelin Global as their, like, global director of information technology, and he made the argument based on the size of the portfolio that the department was managing and the size of the organization and the aspirations, that if we didn't do something, we were going to get what we'd always gotten. And so they stuck me in as the head of the project management office. I don't have anybody working for me right now, so that's fun. But these things happen when you lose $9 million as an organization. It's in the paper, so I don't think that's a secret. But, like, that's how that happened. And it happened, and he got lucky because several people out of that gang of 6 all retired at the same time that he came on. And so, like, the shockwave of the loss of expertise and forward motion was really being felt. I'm a big fan of never let a crisis go to waste. I really think that is the primary vector of advocacy, because like, upper management has 900 million things that want their attention all the time. You can make the argument with as much grace as you want, but they're going to be focused on it when something's on fire.
Yeah, that's the problem within it. Rosalind, I'm sure you turned your camera on because you have a comment. I just want to echo what Christopher said is our project management conversations got thrown way further when we had a corporate attorney joining our team because that culture came in and translated really well for the need for formal project management. Our executive director at the time used to be with UPS, and it's a cross-cultural thing, and it works really well to show this kind of analytic thinking rather than just focusing on the nonprofit mindset.
I didn't have anything to say. I didn't want you all to see me eating.
Oh,
That's all.
Also, thank you, Megan, for the context.
Yeah. Just to know it wasn't our doing.
yeah,
That's
IOLTA
the
screwed you guys, man.
I mean, IOLTA itself is on our
Yeah, it's not-
side,
Well,
but
right. No, the system behind that was, and that was before we were worried about, well, I'm not going to go into it.
kind of concurrent with LSC funding to an extent, but yeah, had kind of thought through that a bit before and some of what was happening as far as like executive orders and grants, but yeah, contracts. And then that kind of hit over the IOLTA stuff hit over the summer, hoping to get resolved, and it didn't. And then, yeah, the final. So stable for now, but had to make some major adjustments last year.
Yes.
Yeah. I forgot to say for context that the lab did have a project manager that had started before me, like pretty sure he was PMP certified. Chris,
He
correct
was
me
a
if I'm
full
wrong.
freight like PMP
Yeah.
style. His background was project management for pharmaceutical companies. So like he came in with a big cannon to address this problem.
Yeah. So he was with the lab for about a year, and then I was a staff attorney in one of our field offices and then transferred over to this role. And we overlapped for about 2 months, but then he left and I kind of de facto took on the project management. So I don't have the PMP. I also haven't been super necessarily interested in getting it because of that. Like, I would really only want it for like nonprofit specific type or like social impact type work. And I just maybe that's the assumption on my end, but I felt like it was not as geared towards that. And so I've been looking for something that's more training kind of in this field. So I love what you dropped in the chat, Shelley. I was just looking at those, especially that one that's like open source for social impact professional certificate coming. But yeah, so I think that has been interesting because we're talking about since I'm kind of in two roles now, and we decided to hire for a software engineer versus like hiring another specific project manager with someone with like that suite of skills, is interesting. But I will say, Jay, I agree with your point of like communication being super important and documentation, especially the kind of institutional knowledge thing that we're talking about too. But when the person is so slammed that they don't have time to do some of that, I think it kind of like further entrenches the problem. So that's and one thing that I would love to do different, and I'm trying to do differently, since I'm like somewhat out of the kind of us internally, but also like the organization wide, kind of out of the crisis moment a little bit of last year is like, okay, everything's not as on fire anymore. How do I actually have a better process around it? Um, yeah. So, and I love all of these thoughts and like feedback on how to do that. Yeah, and how to say like, okay, if you want this done in a certain way, that there needs to be another person helping with it or and if it's not that, then I think part of the tension I see is then especially if one of kind of the stakeholders in the project is they have something else that occupies 95% of their time, and if we're not going to be able to hire for someone that says takes this management part of it off of their plate, then how do we restructure their priorities to include doing some of this, right? And so I think that's hard, especially the more and more that that stakeholder is kind of tied to providing the direct services of our organizations, right? Um, yeah, I've seen that conundrum. Don't know how to
I have
solve it.
just dropped a link to an Amazon. You don't have to buy it through Amazon. You don't have to buy it at all, but it's a book on how to pass the PMP on your first try. And the reason it's in there is not because I want to encourage you to take the PMP, but Andy Crow, the author, he writes books that actually, like, you know how everyone says law school doesn't actually prepare you to be a lawyer? The PMP, the project management body of knowledge, does not help you pass the PMP exam. This book shows you practical ways, has practice exams, but it makes it connect a lot better. The version I took was for the 6th edition. This book in there is for the 7th edition, and Andy Crow will probably come out with one for the next edition when it happens. But it contextualizes things a lot. So even if you're not taking the PMP, the skills are in that book, and they're much more practical than just learning about it through the official PMI system. And I also have noted something I always think is interesting, but I'm definitely biased in this. I am not an attorney. And I think most of the time in organizations, they try and give project management to an attorney. My anthropology side says like there are pros and cons to both. Me not being an attorney means I'm an outsider, and that means I can ask questions and tell people to explain things to me, and I can play dumb, which is a superpower no matter who you are. But then also having to explain things to me sometimes can be interpreted as, why is this taking so much longer? So it, again, depends on the project. That is the one thing I have learned working with legal aids. It depends.
Yeah, that is a
Lawyers
good
come with
point.
this
And
fun little bias that because they know how to run a lawsuit, they presume that the project management skill set that you use specifically to run a lawsuit works for everything. It doesn't, they'll use it for that. But that can produce some interesting conversations around structure, how to structure a project.
yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say I get that pros and cons, Heidi. I think part of it has been the pros, and for me kind of taking on this kind of role is I can, and Chris too, you kind of cut out a loop of like that kind of questioning and back and forth if you can kind of do both. Um, but I would say it's certainly not all attorneys are like that, and we're not taught to be like that either. So I think it's like dependent on, okay, and which I think this is a good leadership development point for nonprofits more, or like our legal aid organizations more broadly, because I think a lot of the types of attorneys that we do attract have work experience in other fields, right? Or maybe they worked before, like I did. I worked before going back to law school, and so that's where a lot of these like skills come from and now can be applied with the legal context. But that's to say there's a lot of folks that just go straight through and yeah, this kind of like realm of thinking or admin management more broadly isn't there as much. And sometimes if we're just, yeah, and leave the management up to that, then it turns into what Chris said of, I'm like, why are you giving me a closing argument right now?
There is
This is not a
definitely a
trial.
difference between the attorneys who had a life before law school and the attorneys who went straight through. I think every organization can see that culture, and you can pick them out real fast.
I mean, if you want to set a grenade in the middle of the table, an easy way to get the lawyers to stop for a second is to just in the middle of a very unproductive meeting, just say, I'm sorry, are we litigating a case, or are we solving a problem?
And the fact is that we should be doing both, right?
Not with all projects. Some of them are different.
Some of them are different, but like that's often a gateway for me to soft tell somebody that they have stepped out of problem solving mode and that they've stepped
Yes.
into advocacy mode and that they have placed the conclusion before the analysis.
Yes.
Mhm. Yeah, I was saying, and then you can see that they think the problem is everyone else doesn't agree with their solution or their
Yep.
point of view. And then like, oh, that's where you're
I
switching
will say
into
that is much
advocacy
easier to
mode.
say to people, would you also have a law license?
Well, and a lot of admin staff and legal aids don't have credentials at all behind them. So advocating for themselves can be a lot scarier. I've said before, my having a master's degree in something that a lot of people would think is really awkward, development anthropology, it's actually been super useful. The interviewing skill set, the idea of having to think about things more holistically and whatnot, it's a very different skill set than what the attorneys have, which allows me to come in, speak a whole different technical jargon than what they're used to, and give me credibility. An admin coming in with a high school education who works on the intake line, they're going to have to go through a lot more hurdles to prove themselves.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I
Unfortunately,
think
our
We're
law
that,
scared
school
of
doesn't
math,
gonna do a
though.
good job of that.
Yeah, and I
of
like bringing
how
math
to-
out to help scare them. You should see me with Excel too.
It's like vampires and garlic. Like I have a social science as my undergrad, and Carolina was very focused on you will understand the math that runs a demographic study. So like they, you start talking about K values and they hiss at you like vampires at garlic.
yeah, Shelley, to your point, the law school doesn't teach us that. And I think it's always thought of a lot of time in law school because it's so oriented towards, say, like big law or very traditional law path is, and even in the public sector, it's like it's kind of acknowledged like, oh, you might have a paralegal or you might have a legal assistant, but it's not this kind of larger holistic conversation. And I think that gets especially contentious when resources are at play,
Yeah.
right? Like, I mean, we never have enough resources to do all that we would like to do, but when there are things like budget cuts and stuff, it's that question of, well, that we could pay an attorney for this versus having another admin person. But yeah, so I think that cultural shift to see that have like I don't know how to describe it, but like seeing, the value and worth. And I think it's not just an upwards thing, right? Because it might be that upwards agrees, but then, everyone out in the field is like, why are we hiring that person?
Yep.
Even if your CEO agrees. And then you have this kind of like internal change management issue. I don't know. But yeah, I've heard that like especially with the funding issues that we were talking about of um people thinking and I don't disagree to some extent, but it's like we can keep throwing individual attorneys in a broken system where we can fix the system a little bit with some of these types of projects and get more out of that time that we do have for attorneys.
I think it goes back
I
to
know.
Shelley's point very early on, where it was about describing the steps that have to go into it, because then you're also proving, does this require a law license?
Mhm.
Like, if it's
Yeah.
more substantive, maybe. If it's less substantive, maybe not.
Legal aid use of attorney time is very inefficient. You know.
I mean,
Well,
I
we
think
are
this is a
running out of
place where
time.
time. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
I was just gonna say, I think this is a place where, like, I often talk about like you gotta do some translation when you borrow the neighbor's homework from corporate. But I do think this is one of the places where the ROI calculation really shows up, as long as you massage it a bit. Like,
Mhm.
okay, we're gonna do this. It's gonna save us 5 minutes. Like, well, that's not very much. Yeah, but we do this 4,000 times a day.
Yep. Awesome. Well, I hope that the session has been interesting for you. I believe next month we are still on track to have a discussion on Agile versus Waterfall. That may,
Yes.
okay, good.
And
And
Heidi and I
so
are presenting, so I should maybe learn something about Agile and Waterfall between now and then.
I was gonna say I don't know what either of those words mean in this context, so I'm excited to learn.
the field trip to Niagara Falls will be
Right?
Yes.
And the ballet.
Yeah, I was like
awesome. So thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you next month.